Calvin Rhodes walked up to the counter with his first-class ticket in hand, the crisp paper catching the artificial light of the terminal. The gate agent, a young man named Trevor, didn't bother to lift his gaze. "Economy's that way," he muttered, gesturing vaguely over his shoulder. He was already reaching for the next passenger's boarding pass. The words struck Calvin like a slap, not because of the volume or the rudeness, but because of the quiet certainty behind them, the practiced indifference. He didn't flinch, didn't say a word. He simply offered a tight nod, a flicker of disappointment flashing across his otherwise calm features. He felt it immediately, the way the air shifted around him, subtle but sharp. Conversations quieted. Glances darted his way and quickly turned. The temperature in the lounge seemed to dip a few degrees. It wasn't overt. It never was. The quiet rejection, the assumption, the disregard, it all came wrapped in civility. Trevor straightened his posture when the next passenger, a white man in a golf polo and tan slacks, approached the desk. "Right this way, sir," Trevor said brightly. "Enjoy your upgrade." Calvin watched the exchange with a calm that ran deeper than still water. He wasn't angry, not in the way some people expected men like him to be. He was focused, alert, thinking. Trevor had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Calvin's first-class ticket felt heavier now. He turned it in his hand once, the edges crisp, the ink bold, his name printed in large letters above a barcode and seat assignment. The lounge was pristine, minimalist, filled with polished chrome and marble, designer chairs placed strategically to offer privacy and comfort. But to Calvin, the place felt clinical, almost surgical in its exclusion. It was 4 in the afternoon. The soft hum of the terminal, the clinking of glass from the bar, the distant whoosh of rolling suitcases, all of it faded into background noise. Calvin didn't see any of it. His focus was locked on the man behind the counter, the one who had dismissed him without pause. Trevor's expression was unreadable, unaware, his eyes scanning the space for anyone but him. Calvin stood with the poise of a man who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. His tailored navy suit sat perfectly on his broad shoulders. He didn't shuffle, didn't cough, didn't tap his foot. He was a statue of composure. Trevor finally looked up again, reluctantly, his gaze flicking toward Calvin before darting away. He reached for the ticket as if swatting a fly. Barely glanced at the name. "Economy's over there," he repeated, still not looking at Calvin. It wasn't the words. It was never just the words. It was the tone. Dismissive, assumptive, routine. Trevor had decided, in a blink, that Calvin didn't belong in first class, that he didn't warrant the smile or the respect afforded to others. And in doing so, he had confirmed something Calvin had known all his life, that status alone wasn't enough to shield him from prejudice. But Trevor wasn't prepared. He didn't see the calm unraveling that was already beginning. Because Calvin wasn't just another passenger. He wasn't just some wealthy executive on vacation. He was the quiet, kind of powerful type that didn't need to raise his voice to shift an entire system. And this wasn't the first time he'd stood in a place like this, faced with the same assumption, the same quiet erasure. He'd grown up studying rooms like this, reading the silent signs of power and exclusion. He knew the rules even when they weren't spoken aloud. He could have walked away. He could have taken a seat, sipped champagne, read the paper, and moved on. But he didn't. Not this time. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was one more entry in a long ledger of daily injustices, 1,000 paper cuts that never healed. Trevor had made a choice. And now so had Calvin. Without a word, he stepped back from the counter and took out his phone. The message he typed was short. Same scenario. Proceed. He hit send. It was all he needed. Calvin had spent decades building more than a career-built network. A quiet, disciplined group of professionals who understood precisely how and when to act. He knew how to wield power without raising a single decibel. It was patience, not rage, that would undo Trevor. As Trevor smiled at another white passenger, offering them effortless courtesy, Calvin remained still, his eyes locked on the exchange. He didn't need to speak to be heard. His presence, and the plan he had just set in motion, were louder than any protest. And Trevor? He had no idea. Within the hour, that would change. Across the terminal, 3 men moved silently. Darnell Price, Malik Henderson, and Reggie Vaughn, each dressed like any other traveler, blending in perfectly. To an outsider, they were just passengers. But to Calvin, they were key components of the machine he had designed. They didn't need orders. They knew the drill. At precisely 4:43 p.m., a low buzz of activity began behind the scenes. A compliance officer quietly entered the staff hallway. A call was placed to corporate. A file, previously marked confidential, was unlocked. Trevor, still oblivious, continued to process passengers with the same mindless confidence. Then he saw the envelope. It was slid across the counter by a sharply dressed man whose badge read Orion Air Compliance Division. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed. Trevor hesitated. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," the man replied quietly. Trevor did. His face began to pale as he read. Effective immediately, Trevor was to be relieved of duty pending an internal investigation. Multiple passenger complaints had been reopened. New video evidence had been submitted. He was ordered to report to room 407 for a compliance hearing. He looked up stunned. This can't be real. But it was. 2 more compliance officers appeared beside him. "Please come with us." Trevor looked around as if someone might stop them. Someone might say this was all a mistake. No one did. The passengers kept moving. The staff kept working. But Calvin was still there, unmoving, watching from the shadows of a sleek pillar. Trevor was escorted away, humiliated, exposed. Behind the scenes, the unraveling had only just begun. Corporate headquarters received the same documentation. And the name at the bottom of the complaint? Calvin Rhodes. But not just a name. A board member. A silent investor. A man with influence far beyond what Trevor could have imagined. The dominoes fell quickly. An emergency HR meeting was called. The regional supervisor, who had long protected Trevor's conduct under the guise of efficiency, was asked to step down. Training policies were overhauled. Sensitivity sessions became mandatory. Every existing complaint was reopened. And Calvin? He boarded his flight, took his first-class seat, and accepted a glass of water with a quiet smile. He didn't speak of what happened. He didn't need to. Word had already spread. Staff whispered about the man in the Navy suit who didn't shout, didn't argue, and still brought down the strongest gatekeeper in the terminal. By the time the plane touched down in New York, Trevor's badge had been deactivated. His access revoked. His face removed from internal directories. He'd been the system's favorite son. Now he was its cautionary tale. Calvin never intended to ruin a life. That wasn't his goal. What he wanted was simple. Accountability. Not just for Trevor, but for every unspoken rule that dictated who belonged and who didn't. He had done more than confront bias, exposed it. Quietly. Precisely. And now the system would think twice. So would the next Trevor. Because Calvin Rhodes had reminded everyone that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And when it does, it echoes forever.